Hey guys, so I just wanted to make a video about the current high strangeness going on in this country right now as we await further election results, well, according to our commander-in-chief. And we also await a transfer of power or not, depending on what the heck happens. So I wanted to start out the video by kind of going back and highlighting some of the things that old school conspiracy theorists told us that we should look out for in an American president or a leader in the event that he or she was getting too much power. Now, as many of you know, it's my opinion that conspiracy theorists and what I call the conspiracy theory industry has been taken over by moneyed interests and the elite. Hence the reason we see Donald Trump now as the poster boy and our first American president helming the conspiracy theory industry and parroting his own conspiracy theories, not the least of which is Q. So I think we really have to be mindful of that. Again, like I said, pre-9/11 and even pre-Occupy Wall Street, the conspiracy theory movement really was more grassroots. And I remember even talking to somebody who had been at Occupy LA, and he said, yeah, there are infiltrators there. And he had all kinds of stories. Now, why is this harmful? Well, first of all, when you have the conspiracy theory movement, and pretty much every movement that starts off as grassroots is eventually appropriated, i.e. made appropriate for this society by the corporations, corporate interests, moneyed elite, and so on and so forth. But obviously, and I'm sure you can see, that this could be a danger because whatever rhetoric they spread could actually, whether you realize it or not, be more beneficial to them rather than us and benefit and salve their interest more than us. So case in point, one thing I did want to mention, there were a couple things I did want to mention. If you are a billionaire, and obviously Donald Trump, many of the things he does benefit not only himself, and many conspiracy theories he shills benefit not only himself, but his millionaire and billionaire friends. One thing I want to make perfectly clear, and you can look this up, is that if you are a billionaire, unless that money is inherited, you are by default a white-collar criminal. What do I mean? There's only one legal way to become a billionaire. That is through inheritance. Everything else, you did some crimes. The crimes, not the least of which, involve insider trading, violating antitrust laws, and bribing politicians. Donald Trump has been bribing politicians for decades. Now he's just eliminated the middleman. And that's another illusion I wanted to disavow people of. You hear the argument so often, especially from his supporters, that like, oh my gosh, he forfeited all his money to be our president. Oh my gosh, what a saint. But here's the thing, guys. His money is not even in an unbiased trust. Jimmy Carter gave up his entire peanut farm when he became president. But right now, all Donald Trump's assets are sitting in an impartial trust. And it's helmed by his son, Don Jr., who heads up foreign affairs in the White House, and it's all very much a clusterfuck, and it's all very much a conflict of interest. So that's number one. Number two, Donald Trump, and in keeping with the whole bribing of politicians thing, Donald Trump now is the politician. He has got the entire Western economy in his whole little back pocket to move and manipulate and move the chess pieces no matter how he prefers, such that it benefits not only him and his businesses when he gets out of office, if he ever does get out of office, number one, and number two, to benefit his cronies and benefactors. Not the least of which he did is give the 1% and 83% tax cut his first year in office. He's rolled back 100 environmental protections, which is real good for businesses. He got us out of the Paris Climate Accord, which is a whole other thing. I know there's a lot of contention surrounding it. By the way, the Paris Climate Accord is non-binding, so it's actually not that strict. But the fact of the matter is that he's taken that as a license in part to make all those environmental rollbacks. So I just want you to think about that. So anyway, going back to grassroots conspiracy theories. So back in the day, when the conspiracy theories were a lot less mainstream, we were warned. We were warned of power coups, power grabs, people overstaying their welcome in office, and so on and so forth. And these were the top 6 concerns. I left out one, that's spying on American citizens, and to a greater or lesser degree, many, if not all of our presidents have engaged in at least one of these transgressions, but I will read them out loud. 1, hindering First Amendment rights. 2, threatening Second Amendment rights. 3, disregarding Fourth Amendment rights. 4, warfare on American citizens. 5, deploying secret police. 6, institution of martial law and or refusal to leave office by way of staging a coup. That would be a domestic coup. And it shouldn't be all too surprising because our country stages political coups all the time, especially in third world countries and brown-skinned people countries. And I don't mean to sound politically incorrect when I say that, but if you look at our foreign policy, most of the countries in which we stage coups are non-white people, not the least of which is South and Central America. Oftentimes if they have a popularly elected leader, usually a socialist leader, they will oust that person and put in a more conservative leader who's more authoritarian. So, I mean, I could go off on a whole other tangent then, but I'm not going to. Suffice it to say, anything remotely resembling socialist is bad for American business and it's bad for capitalism. Now, you may have your own other opinions on socialism. I'm not going to argue against those with you because I know that, there's a lot of varying opinions on socialism, but suffice it to say, Americans are staunchly capitalistic, and I'll leave it at that. So, throughout the course of this video, I'm going to go through evidence, I'm going to go through articles, I'm going to fact check my news sources, and we're going to go and we're going to look at all of the things that he's doing. So one of the things that, of course, spurred my angst, was the other day, it was about 2 days ago, when it was announced that Donald Trump fires Defense Secretary Mark Esper. Obviously, the two men had their differences. We will get to those differences in a bit. But before we did, I wanted to start off with a little something extra that really got my attention. This summer, during the BLM riots and protests, something really got my attention, and I didn't hear it on a lot of news outlets, although admittedly most of the news that I do get is from AM News Radio, which is kind of a Just the Facts Man version of it. And then, of course, I do watch political commentary channels, and, of course, if I tend to see what they're observing in their analysis of the news, I oftentimes tend to agree. But this one caught my attention, and there was only one political commentary channel that really did report on it. And it's Secular Talk, Kyle Kulinski. He's pretty well balanced, although he does skew left, but he gives credit and critique wherever that's due. It was picked up from The Intercept, which is an independent publication, from Ken Klippenstein, I can never say his name, Ken Klippenstein. He tweeted, "Feds intercepted protesters' phone communications in Portland this summer. Intel sources with knowledge of the operation tell me. If you're getting an inside view into your targets, who they are, who they're talking to, the hierarchy." And I was really freaked out by that. So I looked it up and I Googled it. And there was a few different articles, some in better known websites and some in not so well known websites. Homeland Security used aircraft to surveil BLM protests in 15 cities. That's from CNET. Media Magazine, usage of surveillance drones over Black Lives Matter protests in USA. Newsweek, police are monitoring Black Lives Matter protests with Ring doorbell data. All right, from Vox, members of Congress want to know more about law enforcement surveillance of, and I would assume Black Lives Matter, hyperallergenic, the disconcerting implications of drone photography. Futurism, cops are using military spy planes to surveil BLM protests. There was also one in Newsweek as well, although I don't think I got a screenshot of that. One of the best articles came from The Root, and that's also more of an indie publication. The title was "Government Spy Planes and Drones Were Surveilling Recent Black Lives Matter Protests." And to keep things transparent and just above board, I go to my useful little website because I know a lot of people are concerned about fake news right now. And the truth of the matter is you can't know. You can't know if anything's fake news. Although I would tend to wager when a corrupt millionaire tells you that the news is fake just to cover his own ass, that's when I'm least likely to buy it. And frankly, I'm a little bit tired of him crying wolf all the time, but that's just an aside. How do I really feel? So the root, this is media bias fact check, and why I trust media bias fact check, because one of my friends joked, well, your fact check could be wrong about the fact checking. I'm like, I get that. We never can know. You can never know anything unless you were there. And then when you tell it, those people don't have to believe you either. And in any case, it's all a big Rashomon effect because everyone has their different take on what actually happened. Okay, now I'm going off on a tangent. But here it is. So media bias fact check is something that I always use because my litmus test was that if it says what most people say or what most people think that it would say about CNN, MSNBC, and Fox, then it's probably on the level. So what it says about MSNBC and CNN is something like their reporting is mixed and left-center biased. What it says about Fox is that it's mixed and right biased. So yeah, that's about it. Corporate run news media, blah, blah, blah. Let's get ratings. Anyway, so here it is, the root. Okay, what does media bias fact check say? It does say it's got a left bias. That doesn't bother me. I mean, it's like, okay, it's telling us that outright, but it also gives it a high grade. So the reporting is, if you can see, factual reporting, very high, mostly factual and mixed, and then low and very low. Left bias. These media sources are moderately to strongly biased towards liberal causes through story selection, and or political affiliation. They may utilize strong loaded wording that attempts to influence an audience by using appeal to emotion or stereotypes. Publish misleading reports and omit reporting of information that may damage liberal causes. So I do want to let you know, I want to be transparent about where that's coming from, but just by the same token, it says the exact same thing for right-wing publications as well, that are, oftentimes if they have a certain bias. If they're more centrist, not so much. All right, so let's get to this article in the root. I selected it because it was one of the best written. Okay, government spy planes and drones were surveilling recent Black Lives Matter protests. New reports have revealed that both the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security were using spy planes and other airborne surveillance technology to monitor the BLM protests for Black Lives that had been taking place across the country. Despite saying it does not monitor activity protected by the First Amendment, the FBI used a Cessna jet specifically equipped with cameras for long-range video surveillance to capture footage above protests in Washington, D.C. earlier this month. A report from BuzzFeed states, normally the elite spy plane is deployed for some of the FBI's most important surveillance missions, providing eyes in the sky, where federal agents arrest drug traffickers. And actually, I'm having trouble reading the thing from BuzzFeed because I exited out by accident. But anyway, okay. A Freedom of Information request filed by the ACLU in 2015 revealed that the FBI had recorded video surveillance footage via planes flown over protests in Baltimore against the killing of Freddie Gray. Now, that's important to note that this was during the Obama administration. So as we can see, the Donald Trump administration is basically continuing what Obama did. And I find it really strange that, yes, Donald Trump did roll back a lot of Obama policies, but a lot of them were kind of the good ones. The shitty ones he kept in place, like this. The other shitty one he kept in place was the kids in cages down at the border. That was an Obama-Biden policy. Donald Trump left it there. The only thing he changed was that not only did he separate kids from adults, which that began in the Obama era, separating kids from adults that weren't their parents, he also, Trump that is, also began separating kids from adults that were their parents. So there you go. I just had to throw that in real quick. But I mean, of course, I'm not trying to just say that Trump's the only bad president we've ever had or that he's the only controversial president we ever had. A lot of these things work together. But yeah, he's continued some of the Obama policies that I disliked the most, up to and including drone attacks, drone strikes. He actually is doing more of those than Obama did. So it just seems to get bigger and better every administration we have. All right, the Department of Homeland Security has also gone full throttle in monitoring Americans practicing their constitutional right to assemble over the past few weeks. More than 270 hours of demonstration footage from across 15 cities were logged by Homeland Security using drones, helicopters, and airplanes, the New York Times reported. From the Times, aircraft filmed demonstrations in Dayton, Ohio, New York City, Buffalo, and Philadelphia, among other cities, sending video footage in real time to control centers managed by Air and Marine Operations, a branch of Customs and Border Protection. The footage was then fed into a digital network managed by the Homeland Security Department called Big Pipe, which can be accessed by other federal agencies and local police departments for use in future investigations, according to senior officials with Air and Marine Operations. House Democrats wrote to the acting head of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, earlier this month about their concern at surveillance taking place above demonstrations in Minneapolis, saying the deployment of drones and officers to surveil protests is a gross abuse of authority and is particularly chilling when used against Americans who are protesting law enforcement brutality and law enforcement spy capabilities, apparently. The letter requested a list of jurisdictions where the DHS had conducted or assisted in conducting protest surveillance since May, and who in each jurisdiction made the request for such assistance. The question of who is making these orders is an especially relevant one. A preliminary investigation by the National Guard recently found that a lack of clarity in order was what led to a military helicopter flying low and kicking up a strong wind and debris around protesters in Washington on June 1st, a common tactic used by military overseas combat zones, according to CNN. The Department of Homeland Security has claimed that the drones it used to monitor recent protests in Minneapolis, Buffalo, and Del Rio in Texas were not programmed to fly low enough to detect faces, but I wouldn't take their word for it. Stay woke, y'all, and that's pretty much it. There was also another article in Al Jazeera which I was going to read, and it was pretty good. But when I went to Media Bias Fact Check, it gave it a mixed review, so I'm just going to leave it there. You guys can look it up online if you want, but the one from The Root was the best, and they got a high score on their accuracy in reporting. So just to let you know, that's what's so creepy. And also, too, like the data mining of the phones, of the cell phones, to find out who their contacts were and so on and so forth. When I heard that, I was just like, oh my God, I'm just imagining like a CIA, FBI surveillance room with guys on computers or gals on computers looking at everyone's phone data, like as if they're in the person's phone on their computers. That was just kind of freaky. So yeah, that basically thwarts not only the First Amendment, but the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure. And that's a violation, and that's one of the first things that we were warned about in terms of presidents abusing their power. The next thing I wanted to address was Donald Trump gassing his own citizens, i.e. our own citizens, our brothers and sisters, during a peaceful protest in front of the White House this summer. Now, granted, from what I understand, it had gotten a little rowdy the night before the church was burned down. I do understand why that's a cause for alarm. But Trump went out when everybody was being peaceful. So I found a few articles about it online, not the least of which was NPR, a fairly reputable news source. Peaceful protesters tear gas to clear the way for Trump photo op. Peaceful protests. Let's see. Protesters dispersed with tear gas so Trump could pose at church. And there he is. And I don't even know what this accomplished, but we'll get into that in the article. And use of tear gas, by the way, even though technically we can still use it, well, it's kind of crazy. We can actually still use it in the U.S. Technically, it's like a kind of thing, which I'll also get to in another article. But use of tear gas in warfare, as with all other chemical weapons, was prohibited by the Geneva Protocol of 1925. It prohibited the use of asphyxiating gas or any other kind of gas, liquids, substances, or similar materials, a treaty that most states have signed. It doesn't quite apply to the U.S., but even still, it was deemed illegal in general by the Geneva Convention in 1925. That said, I don't know what this photo, again, I think I already mentioned it, but I really don't know what this photo op accomplished. It just seemed very, very, what's the word? It just seemed very superfluous. That's the word I'm trying to come up with. It just seemed very superfluous to me. But I do want to read the article because it does shed some more light on it. And I was honestly shocked even the first time I heard this on news radio. Okay, peaceful protesters tear gas to clear way for Trump church photo op. The plaza between St. John's Church and Lafayette Park was full of people nonviolently protesting police brutality late Monday afternoon when U.S. Park Police and National Guard troops, with the use of tear gas, suddenly started pushing them away for no apparent reason. And then it became clear. President Trump wanted to walk from the White House through the park to the Episcopal Church. Camera crews scrambled to keep up with him as he strode through the park, followed by his daughter Ivanka and her husband Jared Kushner, along with Attorney General William Barr and other administration officials. Trump stopped briefly outside the church and held up a Bible. "We have the greatest country in the world," he said. "Keep it nice and safe." The visit came just after Trump delivered remarks at the White House, declaring himself "your president of law and order" and demanding that governors deploy National Guard units and dominate the streets. He likes that word a lot, dominate, because he dominated the COVID. Like a wrestler. St. John's Church opened in 1816 and is known as the Church of the Presidents, having hosted every U.S. president since James Madison. On this occasion, however, the president's visit was unannounced, and church authorities were furious that the White House did not bother to alert them. There was no reaching out, no sense that it would require some sort of authorization before using the church as a backdrop in that way, said the Right Rev. Marion Edgar Budd, Episcopal Bishop of the Washington with oversight and responsibilities for the church. When the president held up the Bible without praying or quoting a verse appropriate for the moment, Budd was further incensed. "It almost looked like a prop," she told NPR. "That is the most sacred text of the Judeo-Christian tradition. It speaks messages of love of God, love thy neighbor. I was outraged that he felt that he had the license to do that, and that he would abuse our sacred symbols and our sacred space in that way." The church has long been known for its support of social justice causes, and in the hours before the president showed up, clergy and lay volunteers had been ministering to the protesters in the plaza. Protests, some of them violent, had occurred around the church on previous nights, and the church was briefly in danger on Sunday after a fire started in the church basement. The Bible teaches, and this is a tweet from Marion Budd. "The Bible teaches us to love God and our neighbor, that all people are beloved children of God, that we are to do justice and love kindness. The president used the sacred text as a symbol of division." And that's the thing, too. It's kind of just like, if he really wanted to lead, he could have, gone out there and talked to the protests and been like, "Oh, hey, how can I not like how can I help you like a fast food attendant, but just try to figure out what the protesters' demands were, what they wanted." And instead, he just kind of he tear gassed them. He walked across the plaza, took a picture, said a few words, and then went back home as if as if he was his own prop. It was just really, really weird. And that's another thing I've noticed too. When we speak of social justice, all the people doing the protests were calling it civil rights. All the people against the protesters were saying we're trying to have a civil war. I mean, that's just kind of crazy. And I just feel like over the years they've been trying to gin up hatred over social justice by putting the word warrior at the end of it. As if everyone's violent, as if everyone who wants social justice is terrible, as if they're all shrieking harpies like that blue-haired chick on the college campus, and they're not. They're not. They're just trying to make sure that we have social justice. And the thing of it is even, and frankly, 93% of the protests across this country were not violent. They were peaceful. But it was usually when the authorities came in with guns in force, or tear gas, I should say, in force, that things devolved into just this big hellhole. As a matter of fact, in Portland this summer, what happened was, when Trump sent the secret police up to Portland, and that was going to be the other thing I was going to address, the secret police, which is the scariest freaking thing, they couldn't, like in Portland, they couldn't exceed their jurisdiction, which was beyond the federal building, so they kind of had to stay in the federal building. But what I understand was being ginned up from someone on the ground up in Portland was that they started a ruckus in front of the federal building to draw protesters there, and there was all this chicken wire around it. And some folks said, oh yeah, it was a set for Fox News, but you know, that was just a conspiracy theory. I can't substantiate that. But it just seems like there are things that are done to egg them on. I remember in Los Angeles when the Black Lives Matter protests started, they were all peaceful, and then protesters like noticed people going into stores and looting, and they didn't seem to really have any sort of allegiance to the cause. They were just looting and they wanted to get free stuff, and people trying to participate in the Black Lives Matter protests were like, what are you doing here? So it just all seems very, very suspect in so many ways. And here's the thing, like, even if you don't agree with Black Lives Matter, think of it this way. If there's something that you wanted to protest, and say Joe Biden was in office, this sets a precedent. In other words, Donald Trump sending secret police off to people in masks and hoods so that they don't even know who they are. And I remember watching some of the footage of people saying, we don't know who you are. How do we even know you're legit? In other words, how do they know they're not serial killers just wanting to pick people up in vans and take them away to abuse them? But whether or not you agree with the protests or not, it's all one. In other words, if Joe Biden became president and didn't like what you were protesting and he did the same thing to you, this has set a precedent. So in other words, anybody else who comes along and they decide they don't agree with you, they could do the same thing technically. Now, Donald Trump, I mean, who knows what he does agree and disagree with? His mood changes just on the way the wind blows. But this is a very scary precedent. This is your First Amendment right. 93% of the protests were nonviolent. Half the time, they only got violent when agitators came in. Who knows who funded those agitators? I know half the time they were police, half the time they were police or National Guardsmen or secret police that the states did not authorize and did not ask to be let in there. So that's really scary, and that's really the president overstepping his power. It's a little megalomaniacal. I hope I said that right. Anyway, let me continue reading the NPR article. So, a former St. John's minister, Jeannie Gervaisi, was among those attending to the protesters in front of the church when the police moved in. We were literally driven off the St. John's Lafayette Square patio with tear gas and concussion grenades and police in full riot gear, she wrote in a Facebook post. People were hurt so that President Trump could have a photo opportunity in front of the church. He would have had to step over the medical supplies we left behind because we were being tear gassed. And that was written all in caps. In a statement Monday evening, the Episcopal Church president, Bishop Michael Curry, joined in the criticism of Trump's visit. This evening, the President of the United States stood in front of St. John's Episcopal Church, lifted up a Bible, and had pictures of himself taken, Curry said. In so doing, he used a church building as the Holy Bible for partisan political purposes. This was done in a time of deep hurt and pain in our country. And his action did nothing to help us or heal us. Yeah, like I said, he just came in, I'm going to take my picture, and walk back to the White House. Now, to me, that's just not even, I mean, that's something that I can see with my own eyes and hear with my own ears. That's just what happened. Now, of course, I know that there could be omissions in reporting, but that's behavior. That's just the behavior of somebody. I don't need the news to tell me that that's a scary thing that he did, a scary and insensitive thing that he did. The church visit was praised, however, by a member of Trump's Evangelical Advisory Board, Reverend Johnny Moore. I will never forget seeing POTUS real Donald Trump slowly and in total command walk from the White House across Lafayette Square to St. John's Church, defying those who aim to derail our national healing by spreading fear, hate, and anarchy. Well, that's subjective, isn't it? Okay, so to me, it's just not a good thing. And those secret policemen were so scary. And this is the first time I ever remember the president doing that within this country. And I remember being staunchly warned of it by grassroots conspiracy theorists. Now, to be circumspect, technically we can use tear gas within the U.S. on our own citizens, even though it was deemed illegal by the 1925 Geneva Convention. This coming from a CNN article, because I just want you to know what the rules are in this country and what they can and can't do, fortunately and unfortunately. The military is banned from using tear gas on the battlefield, but police can use it on crowds at home. Here's why. The use of tear gas to disperse crowds has come under criticism again as demonstrators nationwide continue protesting systemic racism and police brutality following the death of George Floyd. Top health experts have warned that using the chemical agent could help the coronavirus spread because it irritates the lungs and makes people cough. And organizations such as the American Civil Liberties Union have pointed out that the chemical agent is banned in war. If tear gas is banned on the battlefield, why then can law enforcement use tear gas on civilians at home? Here's what we know. What tear gas is. First off, it's important to understand what exactly tear gas is. Tear gas, also referred to as riot control agent, is a chemical compound that can render people temporarily unable to function by irritating the eyes, nose, mouth, lungs, and skin, according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The two most common riot control agents are chlorocyanidin. Oh boy. These are two really hard words to say. And chlorobenzene. Okay. Despite its name, tear gas actually comes in a powdery solid form. The agents CN and CS, okay, those are short. I can dig that. Are deployed as tear gas when the pressurized powder is mixed into a liquid formulation that is then released into the air as droplets or particles. Tear gas can cause excessive tearing, burning, or blurred vision, as well as a runny nose or a burning sensation inside the nose, according to the CDC. It can also cause difficulty swallowing, chest tightness, coughing, shortness of breath, and the feeling of choking. Someone who has been exposed to tear gas will usually experience its effect for about 15 to 30 minutes after they've been removed from the source and cleaned off, the CDC says. Those who are exposed to riot control agents at close proximity or in a closed space can experience long-term effects, such as blindness, glaucoma, or respiratory failure. How its use is legal. A few years after the end of World War I, world leaders convened in Switzerland and agreed to prohibit the use in war of asphyxiating, poisonous, or other gases, and of all analogous liquids, materials, or devices, as well as the use of bacteriological methods of warfare, according to the Geneva Protocol of 1925. The agreement banned the use of chemical and biological weapons in warfare, though it did not specify what gases exactly were outlawed. The U.S. didn't ratify the agreement until 1975 under President Gerald Ford. When it did, it reserved the right to use riot control agents to control rioting prisoners of war, that's in quotes, among other exceptions. Let's see. In 1993, the United Nations General Assembly finalized the Chemical Weapons Convention, which banned the development, production, stockpiling, and use of chemical weapons and required countries to destroy the chemical weapons and production facilities it possessed. Included in the agreement was also a ban on riot control agents in warfare. Such agents were defined as any chemical not listed in a schedule which can produce rapidly in humans sensory irritation or disabling physical effects which appear within a short time following termination of exposure. The Chemical Weapons Convention went into effect in 1997, but notably the agreement included an exception allowing law enforcement to use riot control agents for domestic riot control purposes. That's in quotes, domestic riot control purposes. In recent years, tear gas has been used to quell civil unrest not just in U.S. cities, but Hong Kong, Cairo, and Rio de Janeiro. Portland, Denver, and Seattle are among cities that have suspended the use of tear gas to disperse crowds, at least temporarily. So, again, you got some things to think about. You got some sort of discrepancies there. But the thing that really got to me of late and made me want to make this video was the inauspicious firing of Mark Esper for Chris, I keep wanting to call him Chuck, Chris Miller. And this article is from the BBC. It gets very high marks in terms of its reporting. See, we have here BBC, high, left center bias, but it does get high marks for its reporting. So I just kind of wanted to go into the whole argument or non-yes man factoring in that happened between Mark Esper and Donald Trump this summer. So Donald Trump fires Defense Secretary Mark Esper. President Donald Trump has sacked, I love that, you can totally tell it's a British publication. Oh, I've been sacked. President Donald Trump has sacked Defense Secretary Mark Esper, announcing on Twitter that the top U.S. official has been terminated. Christopher Miller, the current head of the National Counterterrorism Center, will take on the role immediately. And that's the thing. Donald Trump is fighting domestic terrorism. Oh, and maybe I should have read the Al Jazeera article because that's what the protesters were called, domestic terrorists. So maybe I'll go and I'll just find an example of that to show you guys. All right. It follows a public falling out between Mr. Trump and Mr. Esper in recent weeks. Mr. Trump has so far not conceded the U.S. election to President-elect Joe Biden and has vowed to... I think I cut it off. What does that matter? Oh, challenge the expected result in court. In the weeks before Mr. Biden takes office on 20 January, Mr. Trump is still empowered to make decisions. Mr. Miller was seen entering the Department of Defense headquarters at the Pentagon on Monday, shortly after Mr. Trump announced the dismissal. The former Special Forces soldier served on President Trump's National Security Council before becoming head of the Counterterrorism Center in August. In a resignation letter, Mr. Esper thanked members of the armed forces and said he was proud of his achievements in the 18 months of service at the Pentagon. And that's another thing, and I don't think a lot of people have kept track of this or know or just readily think about this. But the Trump administration has a 78% turnaround. A 78% turnaround. I mean, this guy loves saying you're fired. Either that or people are quitting, and I think it's a little bit of both. And it really, really speaks to the kind of place the White House or this White House is to work. Because if you got a high turnover rate, as the old adage goes, that's not a good place to work. Okay. So Mark Esper basically went on to say, I serve my country in deference to the Constitution, so I accept your decision to replace me, he wrote. Top Democrat Nancy Pelosi criticized the decision. The abrupt firing of Secretary Esper is disturbing. Evidence that President Trump is intent on using his final days in office to sow chaos in our American democracy and around the world, said the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Why did Trump fall out with his defense secretary? Mr. Esper clashed with the president over the White House's attitude to the military during protests over racial injustice earlier this year. As protests rocked the U.S. following the death of black man George Floyd at the hands of police in Minneapolis, Minnesota in May, Mr. Trump threatened to use troops to suppress unrest. In June, Mr. Esper, a former Army officer, said the use of active duty forces was unnecessary in remarks that were known to have displeased the White House. You displease me. Send me another one. Send me Chuck Miller, even though his name is Chris. Following the clash, it was widely speculated that the president would fire the defense secretary, although on Monday, Mr. Trump gave no reason for his dismissal. The White House revolving door, who's gone? Oh, those are other articles. The White House revolving door, who's gone? Joe Biden won the election. What happens now? Mr. Esper has also disagreed with Mr. Trump over the president's dismissive attitude towards NATO. In an interview with the Military Times last week, Mr. Esper said that despite the difficult relationship with the White House, he didn't believe quitting was the right thing to do. The president's going to. He's very transparent in terms of what he wants, and he's been very clear about his views. I'm not trying to make anybody happy, he told the website. What I'm trying to do is fulfill what he wants. I mean, he's the duly elected commander-in-chief, and make the best out of it. He also rejected allegations that he was a yes man to his boss. The newspaper notes that his critics in the administration and Trump himself have called Mr. Esper Yesper due to his reputation for being obedient to Trump. My frustration is, I sit here and say, 18 cabinet members, who's pushed back more than anybody? Name another cabinet secretary that's pushed back, he said. Have you seen me on stage saying, under the exceptional leadership of blah, 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 we have blah, blah, blah? President Trump has fired a significant number of his officials and advisors during his tenure, often using Twitter to announce the dismissal. Mr. Esper's predecessor was James Mattis, who resigned in 2018 over differences with the president, including about war in Syria. Oh, and that's another thing. Yeah, there was some controversy about that, because although it's usually a pretty good thing to pull troops out, and most of us want that, the whole Syrian thing was kind of a mess. It was kind of tricky because it kind of left the Kurds vulnerable, and the Kurds are our allies, and then it also was advantageous to Russia, which people, of course, raised eyebrows at because of the whole Russiagate thing, which, I mean, I looked into Russiagate. It doesn't seem like, see, to me, there are some things that look suspect, but it doesn't seem like it's anything that you could really uphold in a court of law based on what I know. So I could see why people don't believe in the Russiagate thing, but Donald Trump does seem to have kind of a bit of an unnatural closeness with Vladimir Putin. That's all I'm going to say. And then, of course, there's other speculations that Trump's in line with the KGB, but that I'm not even going to go there because I haven't researched that, and I know people's minds are not even open to that. But yeah, so essentially Trump did a surprise pullout of troops in Syria, and he was talking to Erdogan, and Erdogan is somebody that we don't trust, and so it was just really, really strange. He hasn't stopped any of our other wars, of course. He hasn't taken our troops out of Afghanistan. But that's a whole other story for another time. And that's another thing, but that's another Obama policy that he hasn't reversed, the whole thing about Afghanistan. All right. In June, as racial injustice protests were ongoing, Mr. Mattis criticized Donald Trump as the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. And that I would agree with. And another reason that they don't want you liking social justice, and the reason I'm saying that is because social justice right here, if too many people rise up and demand social justice for themselves, it kind of ruins the power structure. And I think right now, that's one of the things. Like, they don't, like, the police force is the last leg of the executive branch. So technically, the police force does work under Donald Trump. The police force is the state. So Donald Trump can't have, at least according to Donald Trump, and the powers that be, they can't have a big old shakeup when it comes to any sort of power structure disruption or people in the lower rungs of power getting too much of what they want. And I think that's one of the reasons why they put the warrior after social justice, to make it seem like everybody who wants social justice is violent, like Antifa and blah, 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 blah. But it's kind of funny, though, because Antifa stands for anti-fascism. So if you just look at the language alone, that's anti-fascism. And that means that Trump and his cronies are technically anti-fascism. But I also read an article, because Trump keeps wanting to blame Antifa, but then I read an article in The Guardian this summer, and The Guardian has a lot of good articles that aren't necessarily reported in American mainstream media. But The Guardian essentially said that they went through police officers' records, and police officers' records were stating that a lot of the people committing the agitation were people like the Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys. I mean, obviously it's nothing that I can substantiate, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. And again, this is just speculation, but I almost wonder if they're working for Trump, because it feels like he wants so much for there to be a civil war. It's like, I mean, excuse my French here, but he creams his pants over it, it feels like, half the time. And, you know, everybody else who just wants to make sure that we keep civil rights in check as a rollover from the 1960s, you know, they get disparaged and called social justice warriors, but then they're calling it civil rights. It's like an ongoing, sort of an ongoing maneuver of the civil rights movement. Anyway, that was too long of a tangent. Let's see. Okay, so that was James Mattis. In June, as racial injustice protests were ongoing, Mr. Mattis criticized Donald Trump as the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. So that's the end of that article. So what have we covered? We've covered the hindering of First Amendment rights by not only using tear gas, an illegal substance, as deemed by the 1925 Geneva Protocols, but also deploying secret police on people who actually said, how do we know you are who you say you are? So that's threatening First Amendment rights. Also picking up people's cell phone data, disregarding Fourth Amendment rights. Warfare on America, number 4. Deploying secret police, 5. Spying, which is number 7, by way of drones. And what have we got left? We've got 2, threatening of the Second Amendment, and 6, instituting martial law. So let's move on to number 2. So here we have a small rectangle table meeting at the White House. And it's Vice President Mike Pence talking to Donald Trump. And I'm not showing a clip of it, although it's a really short clip. It's a little over a minute, because I don't want to get a copyright strike. But it's Mike Pence talking to Donald Trump about due process and gun collection. And he's essentially saying, yeah, if it feels like there's a possible assessment of like a threat to someone who owns a gun or to people in their lives, we'll go and we'll get a search warrant and we'll exercise due process. And Trump, sitting across the table, says, oh no, why can't we just take the guns right away? So if you're at all for the Second Amendment, I would be cautious about that, because while gun owners are not doing anything to annoy Trump right now, who's to say that he's going to turn on them the same way he turned on Black Lives Matter protesters? I mean, this guy's personality shifts the way the wind blows. And this is just something else as a little point of interest. Trump said, I like taking the guns early, not Harris, which is just another personality trait of Trump. Oh my gosh, I'm getting tired. Personality trait of Trump. He accuses other people of saying and doing some of the things that he says and does. So this is from a site called factcheck.org. I stumbled across it when I was looking up the aforementioned video, which I will leave as a link in the description. Trump said, I like taking the guns early, not Harris. Okay, quick take. Facebook posts claim that Senator Kamala Harris said, I like taking the guns early. She didn't say that, but Donald Trump did. Full story, dozens of conservative Facebook pages have been sharing a picture of Senator Kamala Harris with a quote that says in part, I like taking the guns early. But the quote isn't from Harris, who is the Democratic nominee for vice president. It's from President Donald Trump. Trump said it during the February 28th, 2018 meeting on gun violence, 2 weeks after 17 people were shot dead at high school in Parkland, Florida. Vice President Mike Pence, seated across from Trump, said, Vice President Mike Pence, seated across from Trump in the televised White House meeting, had explained one legislative option states can use for disarming potentially dangerous shooters. If family members or law enforcement officers are concerned that someone is a risk to himself or others, they can go to court and get an order, sometimes called risk protection orders or gun violence restraining orders, to confiscate that person's weapons, Pence said. Trump responded saying, oh, Mike, take the firearms first and then go to court. Because that's another system. Because a lot of times, by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking guns early. Like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida. He had a lot of firearms. They saw everything. To go to court would have taken a long time. So you could do exactly what you're saying, but take the guns first, go through due process second. The parts of that quote in bold are what appear in the Harris meme. Similar text has also appeared with a picture of Democratic Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a frequent target of false memes. Oh my God, once I saw this video from High Impact Flicks, and I think he's part of the mainstream conspiracy theory movement, and it was so funny. Like, he was trying to debunk Ocasio-Cortez, so he did this whole video of her, and she was talking about, like, giving people health care. And I hate the word free health care because it's not free. It's called getting what you pay for your taxes. Not just the good kind of health care the rich get when they hardly pay any taxes compared to us, percentage-wise. But anyway, every freaking thing. Like, so all it was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez being interviewed. And then all he did was he would listen to her answer, stop the video, and repeat back exactly what she said by going, no, 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 by doing a stupid voice like that. And I'm like, and I'm watching this video and I'm like, I thought this video said you were going to debunk her. You're just acting like a 6-year-old. So again, this is what they're reduced to. This is what the mainstream conspiracy theory movement reduces itself to. Oh, God. All right. So, when Harris was the Attorney General in California, not that she's perfect, not that I'm saying that Kamala Harris is perfect, but I'm just saying that they attributed Trump's quote to the wrong person. In other words, that he lied, which he's been known to do. Like the time he was being asked about Prince Andrew this summer, and he claimed not to know anything about Prince Andrew or anything about Prince Andrew related to Jeffrey Epstein, when a few months earlier he was totally criticizing Prince Andrew in relation to Jeffrey Epstein. You know, little things like that you can see and notice for yourself. You're like, okay, this guy's lying. When Harris was the Attorney General in California, she supported the creation of a gun violence restraining order law of the sort that I'm so sorry, you guys. I don't know what it is. Like, I didn't line up the article properly. Of a gun violence restraining order law of the sort that Pence described, but we could find no record of her making the suggestion that due process should be ignored. As we said, though, Trump has made that suggestion. The video showing his remarks as below. So there's that video, and I could link that as well, but I'm definitely going to link the CNBC video link where it's just them sitting around a table having a conversation about guns and due process. Okay, so then number 6, the potential coup. This was rather triggering to a lot of people. So Secretary Mike Pompeo said yesterday, this is breaking, when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was asked if he would engage with the Biden transition, he just responded, there will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. And then he laughed. And I watched the whole rejoinder a second time, and my thought was he could either be joking or that could have been an evil laugh. And even if he was joking, it wasn't a funny joke, so don't quit your day job, Mikey. And when there is a joke and there's no punchline to it, it usually means it's true. It usually means there's some truth behind it. So that was really freaky. I really hope they're not planning on staging a coup, just saying. And then I found some further speculation on Facebook today. Somebody posted an article, Trump is attempting a coup in plain sight. The person who posted it said, wow, I think there's going to be a coup. Trump fired the head of defense at the Pentagon and 4 others, all who opposed his use of military force on protesters. He's replaced them all with staunch Trump supporters, and Mike Pompeo just said that there will be a smooth transition to a Trump second term. This is getting real serious. He's planning a military coup to take over the government. Firing Esper and replacing him with Chris Miller, who isn't opposed to utilizing the Insurrection Act, allows Trump to use military force on the population. Why else would he do this after the election results? Trump also reiterated he's not conceding. This is going to get bad. There might actually be a civil war, which, as I said before, might be what Donald Trump wants. And we all know Trump hates losing, and he totally disrespects losers. And even in this, as per the 2016 Republican primaries, he said this, based on the fraud committed by Senator Ted Cruz during the Iowa caucus, either a new election should take place or Cruz results nullified. He is constantly obsessed with election results and who came out on top and who cheated and this, that, or the other thing. And a lot of times Donald Trump accuses people of doing the same things he himself has done. As I mentioned, he started trying to steal this election not long before, but a couple months before, by trying to discourage people to vote by mail, because he just was under the assumption that everybody would stay away from the polls, everybody who didn't support him, because the people who didn't wear the masks would go to the polls and vote for him. So, myth, the Democrats stole the election. In fact, Trump did everything he could to steal it, including a shit ton of voter suppression, and he still fucking lost. So I really, myself, from my own bias, I don't buy that Trump won this election at all. Now, to address some of the things that people have been saying, and there are only certain things I've been hearing, I haven't delved into it probably as much as what people would prefer in order for me to make my case. But let me just address some things. So it's my understanding that a lot of people are saying that there was no voting transparency. But let me get into this. So really, election result counts are actually not as private as we think, especially now in the big technological age. I was able to look online and I was able to listen to some editorializing, and it appears that a lot of election and vote counts are now done online. Like, in other words, they have live feeds. So as you can see here, the top option on Google says live feed, Los Angeles County Registrar, Records County Clerk. Vote count live streams are here to stay, MIT Technology Review, and that was 7 days ago. And then we have vote count live streams. Nervous here. Watch Philadelphia count votes on live stream. Now, of course, how close you can get, I don't know. But just so you guys know, this is a thing. This is an actual thing that's going on right now. And then there was kind of an interesting notification from 9 News, who can watch vote counting process. So let's see. Verify. What it says here is each state has different rules and different levels of access when it comes to who can observe the counting of votes. As vote counting has dragged on in the contentious 2020 presidential race, controversies have continued to arise over the process of tallying ballots. Many wonder who can be in the room where vote tabulations are taking place, especially in places like Detroit and Phoenix, where rowdy crowds sought entry. The question: Who can lawfully watch votes being counted in a presidential election? The answer: states vary considerably in their policies regarding watching voter counts, the National Conference of State Legislatures says. However, many jurisdictions are offering live streams of vote counts for public to see. What we found: some states are fairly open on who can watch once an election enters the counting process, while others are stricter. The report Who Can Observe U.S. Elections by the Carter Center and State Legislature Conference shows. For example, by statute, Arizona says all proceedings at the counting center are open to the public. It also requires election officials to provide live videos linked to the Secretary of State's website for viewing by the public, and a recording to be kept through the challenge period of the general election. So, in terms of vote counts, like if you want to try and ding certain voting centers on not counting the votes appropriately, it's a lot more transparent than I thought, and I didn't know that, so I thought that was really interesting. The other thing I wanted to address is, of course, what's his name, Hawthorne, I think. He stated that he heard officials in the post office talk about dumping ballots. That's hearsay, and again, I always try and think of, when I'm listening to evidence up to and including the Russiagate thing, could this be presented in a court of law? Now, as far as the Russiagate thing went, I was like, no, you could not really prove that Donald Trump was connected with Russia, from what I understood. And it feels like the same thing with this, the whole voter count thing. So Project Veritas, I did immediate, because they printed an article and then the guy retracted his statement. It could have been intimidation. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there was some funny business going on, but even if it was funny business, there probably still wouldn't be enough votes to sway back the election, particularly if it's just Pennsylvania, because as it stands now, Donald Trump still doesn't have the votes. So Project Veritas, it didn't even say that it's a right or left. I mean, it does say that it's extreme right, but it just says questionable source. I mean, it's mixed and it's a questionable source. So that alone, it basically says a questionable source exhibits one or more of the following: extreme bias, consistent promotion of propaganda / conspiracies, poor or no, and again, mainstream conspiracies, I don't trust anymore, poor or no sourcing to credible information, a complete lack of transparency, and or is fake news. Fake news is the deliberate attempt to publish hoaxes and or disinformation for the purpose of profit or influence. So, yeah, I've heard a lot of bad things about Project Veritas. So that's where they were going to print it, or where they did print it, and the guy retracted it. And of course, back in the old days, I would have said, oh yeah, somebody got to him. And they may very well could have. Or Who knows? It could have been something else. Now, the last thing I wanted to address, because I've heard that a lot of people had concern about this, was that in some states, people had concerns that there were more votes than there were registered voters. And that could very well be true. But what they're not taking into account is that in a lot of states now, there is same-day voter registration. And I'm going to go through a few states. It turns out that 19 states let you register to vote on the same day. I believe mine, California, is one of them, although California is not one that's being contested. These states include Michigan, Minnesota, Montana, Nevada, North Carolina, Utah, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. So that could account for some more discrepancies. I'm just very wary of this whole recount type thing. I'm also very wary of Rudy Giuliani. I had a friend who lived in New York in the 80s, and she got attacked in Central Park. And it wasn't the Central Park 5, but she got attacked in Central Park, and she actually had to call Rudy's office and deal with him. And she said he was like the worst, most insensitive, odious man she had ever had the misfortune to deal with. So just even on that personal anecdote alone, I don't really like him. I don't trust him. And he's kind of a joke. Oh my God. And that thing in front of the oh my gosh, the Four Seasons, between the porn shop and the crematorium, that made me pee myself. Sorry, this is so bright. One of the last things I wanted to kind of address was oh good, there, it got less blurry. One of the last things that I wanted to address was a tweet, Christmas Eve, that Trump posted in 2016, shortly after winning the election. And again, he is still obsessed with the 2016 election, that he didn't get that he got fewer popular votes than Hillary Clinton did. But regardless, he just claims everything is rigged. And eventually it's like, boy that cries wolf, we don't want to see no boys, we don't want to see no wolves. It's ridiculous. So his tweet is, Vladimir Putin said today about Hillary and the Dems, in my opinion, it's humiliating. One must be able to lose with dignity. So true. Hillary didn't lose with dignity? I mean, okay, she made her concession speech the morning after, and everybody jumped down her throat then, not the least of whom was Trump and Trump and the Republicans, but she conceded. And here Donald Trump is freaking out over that. Can you imagine if the shoe was on the other foot? Hillary had won the election, and now she was sitting in the White House refusing to leave. I mean, just think about that. Like, think about if you consider that acceptable behavior. Because people, I guarantee you, people hate Hillary Clinton on many levels just as much as they hate Donald Trump. People all want to believe that Donald Trump is some sort of outsider because he wasn't a politician before, although he definitely used to rub elbows with politicians and donate to their causes to get legislation that he wanted. So I really don't understand why people think he's an outsider for that fact, number one. Number two, the mainstream conspiracy theory movement is now so hell-bent on criticizing Hollywood and calling Hollywood the devil and everybody in Hollywood is evil. Well, that's where Trump came from before he became a politician. He was a Hollywood TV star and a very long-running reality show. He's an actor. He's an actor and a con. And he strings people along. And he's a great showman. I mean, I will give him that. I enjoyed watching The Apprentice. I didn't think that he seemed nice, and I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him, and I wouldn't want to be alone in a room with him. But he was very entertaining. But my point is this. He knows how to get people riled up. He knows how to entertain people. He knows how to entertain people in speeches. I don't find them particularly entertaining myself because most of the time he's talking about himself and pumping himself up. And, that's just getting really old to me. But I can see why people like it because it's not, quote unquote, presidential. But here's my thing. Like this whole Q thing. I could tell you in 1 second why Q is not real. Because if my dumb, relatively normie ass knows what Trump's next move is and knows some of the code words he's using in his tweets, then so does the deep state and the CIA. I mean, how is he going to get? He's not going to get anything accomplished if the the bug repellent, the deep state knows about it. He's not going to. I mean, so that's my whole thing. You can't. Well, it just can't be true. You know, the deep state and the CIA cruises the surface web as much as they do the deep web and the dark web. And 4chan and 8chan ain't no exception. So anyway, I'm just going to leave you all with that. I hope I didn't offend too many people. I just had to get the things off my chest. I just wanted to sort of just encourage you guys to be mindful of, like, when somebody tries to tell you something and they try to show you propaganda, just ask yourselves who you think it benefits. Does it benefit polluting corporations? Does it benefit the 1%? Does it benefit unscrupulous business owners? Like when they try and make you mad at people who will work for undocumented wages, taking your jobs. Well, they weren't going to hire you anyway. They're unscrupulous businessmen. It's nothing personal, just business.